Starting and started. Welcome to our fifth lecture. And so it's after this one more to go. Sorry. And today it's about tools, sprints, workshops, canvases, and that will be mostly Risto's part. Welcome back, Risto, from Norway. And before that, we will have a little recap on this last week's facilitation on depth and reflection on the exercise number 4. So you can take the next slide. So the purpose of the exercise was, you can just put all those four things there. So this time the exercise was a little bit different. So it was the point was to get experience on deliberate role taking, as the facilitation is about roles as well, and we have to take that, agree on roles, and then understand that there is certain role boundaries, and that's one essential part of this kind of professional facilitation. And then second purpose was to get experience on a reflective conversation. So it was about the experience, the course experience, and when talking about that, we reflect on, and that's also a core part of when we talk about this meaning-making part of facilitation. That it's pretty much, it's not just of course there is different contentual or this kind of substance talk, but it's also about the experience, and that's what if we make meanings about and sense out of our experience, then we need this kind of reflective conversation, and it's also personal. Then other part, the third part was to get experience on deliberate listening, so that we really enable the other to talk and make sense, and we help on that, and this kind of helpful relating was the fourth purpose of the exercise, so that we try to ask good questions and help the other to make sense, and maybe open up a little bit new meanings and new views and new aspects and perspectives on his or her reflection and meaning making. And that was the purpose. So next slide, please. And when going through your reports, it was very, very interesting again, and there was a lot of kind of fascinating learning experience in the stories, and vast majority of those were very, very well to the point, and it was nice to read that they were. You felt that this exercise was useful and even fun to do, and then there was some amazement that how just 15-minute dialogue can make a difference, or open up that it's just 15 minutes, but there's pretty much stuff there when there is just deliberate listening, and you can just talk about your own experience, and the other is helping us to make sense and open different things. And the other part was also that listening is not just words, but it's much more concentrating and not saying your own opinion in a way, or sharing your own experience, but letting the other to talk. And this is also it's not just a facilitation, but whatever role we are, leaders in other professional roles, I think this kind of deliberate listening is very, very useful, and we can learn to do that. And for some it's more natural, and for some others, when we are so enthusiastic or we have so many good ideas and we are very active, then really learning to hold back or not to say. We can practice that, we can learn to do that, but it's, of course, we need exercising that to routinize, and that's very core of learning to be a facilitator, or well, I would argue also to be a leader or a good collaborative partner. Next slide, please. So what was the experience challenging? Maybe this deliberate listening. So how to keep curious here and now stance that, okay, I just try to be empty head. And that's part of the exercising. And giving up the role, how to not start sharing your own experience, because it's very natural for us. And we get a lot of ideas from others, as many of you reported that when you're listening to other, you started to reflect in your head your own experiences as well, and get new kind of view angles by just listening to others' experiences and stories. And of course, there is a tendency that you're willing to share that. But it was also that this questions part. Of course, there was not so many hints for you what are the good questions here. Maybe we should somehow revise the instructions to somehow to start, because some of you felt that, okay, the client was so active that I had no time to ask anything, because he or she started to tell the experience, and then it was just flowing very well, and it was hard to interrupt or ask any questions. And sometimes it can happen that way. But of course, it's also when we are clients, maybe it's also good to let the facilitator or coach to take his or her part. But then the questions, what are the good questions, is also they can be that we can sometimes just stop and, okay, hey, very good story, but I'd like to dig a bit deeper from this. But of course, this is now what we have to somehow through exercise, through practicing, through routinization, we learn to when to interrupt, when to let go. But then questions can be like, okay, how was the experience for you? And so starting a very open question, and would you tell about that? And then what was good in that, and so on. But I think here the challenge maybe is so that we concentrate on the substance quite often, that can I ask something about substance? But when we are in this kind of facilitation or coaching role, as it was a purpose here to talk about the experience, how the course experience as a whole has been for me. So have I been able to study as I planned, or what has been difficult, what has been easy, what has been kind of revelations, and so on, and maybe not, and how has it been, how have I felt about the course? So that kind of question. So we can also focus more the experience. And when we talk about transformation and change experience, there's a lot of emotions involved. And sometimes in facilitation, it's not just about the content, what we do, but how we experience the situation and the process. And here it's always also that when we ask about personal experiences, then we involve and engage people more. And also that people come more visible as a persons and not just this kind of with knowledge. And that can be a very important part when we talk about the facilitation, that we can hear the feelings, emotions, ask about that, and let people talk about that part as well. And so the questions can be concern both the content, what we are talking about, but how we talking about that, and how was the experience, and what does it mean that there was difficulties, or there was this kind of let's say good vibes and good things happen. Okay, next. Okay, so when we're talking about the facilitator's role or coach's role, a very important part is that he or she enables a safe space for client to talk and reflect on. And that's why it's important also to make a deal in the beginning and become kind of present and agree on the roles and boundaries and also the guidelines and principles. That it's always kind of when we are talking about this kind of personal level talk, it's also confidential. And this kind of trustworthiness and confidentiality is the core. Maybe I didn't last lecture. I didn't emphasize this enough, but it's very important when we talk about personal stuff that it's always confidential. That it's not the facilitator's coach role to tell anything from outsiders. But when we have collective process, of course, it's then that the meaning making is collective as well. But again, this facilitator's role is not to be a kind of messenger in practice. And then the facilitator coach enables, it's kind of experiential process as well, this kind of facilitative talk and facilitating the experience to be a good, that there's appreciation, feeling of competence, engagement, involvement, and also progress. That the facilitator is something that is we should focus on the process and being helpful for the client, and so that's something that brings this neutrality. And it's always relational living process, and there's a human side, social sides, human side, as important as the methods. And the methods just help us to structure, but the relationship is the point. And the method is just helping kind of tool to enable, and of course, achieve the results to the outcome. But then this relationship part is well, I would argue that when we get more experience, then we learn to take the people first, and then to apply method next. So build relationship first, and then apply method, not just starting with the method. And so that's maybe one thing. And last slide, please. Okay, you can just, if there's, and now becoming a facilitator is pretty much based on the experiential learning, and so the more you do, more you get used to, you get repertoire, and you get used to take the role and so on. So it's pretty much, so practice as much as possible, and I think the core is the genuine interest to be helpful. And it's not, we can just put aside our own ego that we are knowing best or so on. So it's pretty much this kind of put aside your ego and be kind of process persons, is meaning that we are focusing on the process of helping, and we enable the client to do the work, and they have the ideas, they have the content, and of course there is this, what we talk about, that there is this knowing about the content and being the expert as well. So how much we bring this, of course, in a consultant role, it's quite often asked, but sometimes as a facilitator we can be too active on the substance side, and that's something we should be aware of, because then we take the responsibility from the client, that they are responsible and accountable for their own questions and also answers and solutions. But I really enjoyed reading your reports, and hope this was a good exercise, or I like to believe that it was, and adding value also to reflect on your course experience so far. But thanks on my behalf. So I think Risto, stage is yours now, so please.
Yeah, thanks. Any comments? Anybody want to say something or write something in the chat?
I would like to say, if it's okay.
Oh,
sorry,
absolutely.
I didn't raise my hand.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
I actually found it quite challenging to be a coach, to design these questions. It was like, for me, it has always been, oh, this is so easy. It's like I can do it immediately. But when actually I was in the process, it felt very challenging, because like all this validation, and then basically on the go, forming these questions. It was a very interesting experience. First of all, thank you for giving this experience, because I've never done that before. And it always felt very easy from the side. But once you are in that, you're put kind of in a spot. It was very challenging, at least for me, to come up with this like immediate questions and without interrupting basically my client, so that, you know, like the talk doesn't get interrupted from the client side, but I also help kind of to develop the idea. And then, so yeah, it was like I was brought in a spot immediately, and it was challenging, but it was very nice experience for me at the same time. Now I know how they feel. So.
Okay. Thanks, Anja, and thanks for sharing your experience. And this is just something that these good questions is one core thing when we talk about this kind of facilitation or guidance-based professions, that how to have those. And of course, it's when we warm up, have this introductory talk, then we can also somehow set the tone or set the stage. And of course, what was not emphasized in this exercise was that in good coaching situation, we also set the goal. What's the kind of bound? What's the topic, and what we want to achieve through this discussion? And then that, and of course there is if you're willing to learn about coaching, then this kind of there is different how to structure the discussion. So, for example, this kind of grow model. So that we set up the goals, then we talk about the current reality. So what is the problem? What is the situation? What has been done? And then we create options that what could be done, how to solve this problem, and then what are the kind of next steps. And this kind of structuring can be very helpful also. And maybe next year I will introduce this more. But of course, this how to start. What is the good opening questions, and then of course it then takes its own course. But this kind of a structure of that there's different phases can be very helpful, or is helpful anyway. So then and sorry for leaving this maybe quite open or too open this task or assignment this time. But main point is always that we have this helpful stance. And I'm here now to listen to you. And so that's the most important thing.
Couple of comments in the chat, but I think we'll move on. But just my quick comment for this is that if you have ever done or been properly trained to do open-ended interviews, that's pretty much a skill, but it's really about listening and also balancing between the asking and the listening and all of that. But actually the theme or one of the big themes of today, so if you let me, I'll continue, and please do continue writing in the chat, is that, of course, a lot of things we've done and the exercises are face-to-face or online face-to-face, and the group work, and there are a lot of tools about this. I've said this a couple of times earlier. But hardly ever we actually look at those tools from the facilitator's perspective. So the tools, for example, I'm going to throw the examples such as these. Oops, that's not the slide. We often think about how do participants use these tools. So if you bring like a lean canvas to the workshop, so how are the participants going to use them? And also how are they going to be used for decision making? So before the break, we're going to talk about, well, what about these tools from the facilitator's perspective? And the whole point, of course, with all of these different tools and methods and whatever you're doing is that it's a reminder that you're bringing the mindset and the way of working with the tools. So the tools are not neutral. You're most probably bringing a way of that, hey, did you realize that we work this way? Or did you realize that you're actually thinking with this kind of a mindset, design mindset or business mindset and so forth? And really the focus is looking at it as a facilitator, as a midwife. That's, of course, a TV series, if you didn't notice. what does it really look like? What does it mean to be a facilitator? And let's go into practice soon. But the whole midwife idea is that kind of this mindset that you take in the situation, that it's not really your baby, that you're helping the other people to deliver something themselves, that your participation there is very important, but at the end of the day, you are the one who are helping other people to succeed. And then maybe some of you are asking, well, what if I'm not an external facilitator? You know, many of you are in a situation that you might be the decision maker, that you are actually one of the participants. What if you are the owner of the product or service or campaign that you're working on? Well, how about then just thinking that what if you are still the midwife? What if as a boss, you take a midwife kind of stance or midwife role and you're helping other people to succeed? Whether it is generally speaking in your job or whether it's that one workshop or, you know, in this project and so forth. So even if you're still the responsible person, the decision maker, I'm sure that, you know, having your midwife hat on helps you probably understand the tools and the facilitation process. So a couple of steps to go. First of all, it's kind of a classic, is that we have all these tools and we have all these methods. And we should not be zombies and just use them. Let's take this tool, let's take brainstorming, let's take a business model canvas and then just use it. But it would be really professional to understand what are the tools actually helping us to do. But the tools are there facilitating and bringing the mindset and, you know, way it works. And first of all, the tools are not just for doing and understanding and looking at the perspective. Of course, they are really good at it, but here's kind of my 4 angles that I'm going to go through with you to realize that tools also are for communication. The tools are what I call research, which is generating new knowledge. The tools are very much about engaging others. I think that's almost obvious. And yes, finally, the tools are actually really good at getting things done. So let's go over these 4 angles and maybe, you know, help you understand almost any kind of a tool. Because I'm kind of generalizing here and saying that practically any kind of a tool, such as those canvases I mentioned, you could look at it from these different dimensions. So the first dimension is that what's the kind of the communication aspect of a tool? Maybe you're using a tool to sell ideas. Maybe you're using a tool to argue your decisions or to clarify complex things. And, you know, let's just put these things on a wall and start clustering them. That's a clarification of complex things. And that might be actually a way of communicating the complexity and bringing out the simplicity. And just a couple of tools from kind of the lean agile design world listed over there. If you look at, for example, a service blueprint tool, it definitely has. You can use it for all of those 4 things I mentioned there above. And if you want to understand the communication aspect of the tool that you're using, kind of a sparring question you could ask yourself is that if I was alone, if I was the only person in this project, would I use this tool? Because if you would be the only one, there's no need to communicate to others. So you kind of understand that if I was the only person, no, I don't really need to do this. So it means that there's no need for communication, which also works the other way around. Then to generate new knowledge, that aspect, what I call researching here. So you bring in a tool to your project, to your workshop, to gather data or knowledge. Or maybe you bring in your customers and you make them do things with different kind of tools or methods and, you know, whatever. And that's definitely to gather data, knowledge, analyzing. You might have tools to do that as well. Tools to grasp the current situation. So what are actually our goals and how do we prioritize them? And, you know, the dumb tool you used 2 weeks ago, that's a tool for grasping the context and the situation, just like the onions. And kind of another way of putting it there is to elicit information that is not obvious, the implicit stuff. And if you think about all the pair work we have made you do, it's actually quite a lot about because you need to explain to another person. And actually, like I think one of your comments said a few weeks ago was that, kind of this invisible information starts popping up that you already know, but now that you said it aloud, it becomes clear. And there's a list what kind of things that, tools and methods can be do that. And then the sparring question is that if I feel that we know enough, that, we don't need new information, should we use this tool? And if you're like, no, we're okay, we should start actually move forward, then this tool is not for you. Philip is asking, should product backlog be intended for communication? Absolutely, think about it. It is a communication tool of saying that this is our priority right now, and right after it's this. So it definitely has a communication aspect. And my point here is that all tools have these different aspects, but you should kind of understand which one is important in what situation. And then kind of the obvious tool, I'm sure because you're taking a facilitation course, is that a lot of the tools are for engaging people, getting people to contribute, helping them to give their opinion, helping people to work together, share information, ensuring diverse perspectives and so forth, generating commitment and ownership. So actually, if you think about classical brainstorming, that everybody comes up with their ideas, I don't know about you, but often I've been in a brainstorming situation where you can almost throw away the Post-its after it's done. Because the only thing you wanted was to get everybody involved and engaged. Just like you have those kind of funny little games you do that people get more energized. That's really engaging people, creating the space and the atmosphere that now we are in a creative mode and everybody gets to say things. And then you maybe change a different tool to get the results. And the sparring question here that I put here, that if all my coworkers and colleagues were machines, would I use this tool? Meaning that this is the human part of things. We need this because we are people and we need to kind of have social interactions, generate those meanings, have those negotiations and so forth. And then of course the fourth one is that yes, a lot of these tools, they're not just, silly games to engage people, but at the same time, we actually take things forward. But rather than doing some game, what I call a silly game, which are actually usually very good, but let's call them silly games. Now, why don't we just do the real thing, for example? Or let's do the real thing in a silly way so that we actually engage people and, get the creativity and so forth. But yeah, a really good tool can be actually used that we generate those results. A really good brainstorm is that we actually come up with some kind of a raw ideas and so forth. And the sparring question here is that if I had to give a presentation, would I use this? Because here my example is that the presentation is purely communication. But if it's for me, it's, enough presentations, we need to get this done. And you kind of look at the tool, that is this the tool I would use? So to summarize these 4 dimensions is that kind of to understand the purpose of the method or the tool, to be more than a zombie that just mechanically uses a tool, but you really understand that this specific tool can be used in different ways. It can be used for communication purposes, it can be used for new knowledge, engaging people and doing things. Let's see what you write here in the chat. Felipe is active again. Good for you, Felipe. From my side, a customer, I thought I was already expecting to be interrupted and have questions guiding me as the point start with this design was to have our expression. Okay, that's still about the weekly stuff. Any comments about these tools? I'm going to now next go a little bit more, even more practical. So to kind of recap, like I said, we all know the kind of the ancient wisdom that you should understand your tools much deeper. So this is kind of a summary. What does it mean to understand your tools and methods deeper? That you can take your individual tool and look at it from all these, at least these 4 different dimensions. And then once you understand that and you read the situation, you're like, wow, actually, I'm going to take this tool because we really need to engage people and communicate things and so forth. Okay, let's go to step 2. And again, the facilitation perspective in the second part is that how do we, because if you take any of those tools I've been using as examples, like business method canvas, lean canvas, customer journeys, you can read a lot of school books and manuals and watch videos of how do you use those tools yourself. But there's a difference about how you use themselves and how do you make other people use it. Because at the end of the day, we're most probably doing teamwork. We most probably need all those diverse opinions and everybody to commit and all of that. So the difference between a facilitator and a solo artist. A bit of a disclaimer, because when I'm talking from my own experience. So almost a decade of doing these things, facilitating and running teams and building services and products and campaigns. So my background is from lean service creation. So that's what me and 2 of my colleagues created many years ago. And kind of it takes together a lot of our experiences of tools and building a tool set. And then after that, once we had it, then the experience of how do you actually make other people use the tools and not just how we use it and how to make others. So that's my background. And there you can see a lot of canvases, let's put it that way. My previous life was full of canvases. And the 3 things I want to really talk about here before the break, which I believe that are the things that as a facilitator you most probably need to address, you're going to bump into. So how do you get people to give strategic answers to the questions that the tools have? How do you bring the customer perspective? Any designer out there knows probably very well what this means. And the third one is the classic about ideas and concepts, which everybody here has done, is brainstorming and coming up with ideas. So at least these are my tips and tricks as a facilitator. Where do you bump your head into and maybe how to get forward with it? Let's go. First, facilitating strategic thinking. And yes, about clear objectives. That's another way of saying strategic thinking, I believe, is how do you help other people to write really good goals and objectives. So you have done this already. The problem is that if you ask people really strategic questions about their work, organization, or whatever they're doing, it's difficult to give answers because strategy and all related is difficult. But even more difficult is to write them down. So you can have a nice chat and a conversation about your project and its strategic impact. But if you ask that person to write them down in clear language, that's even more difficult. So you can ask questions such as those, but when you're asking people to write them down, you're asking even more, just to be very conscious of that. So a couple of tricks I've been at least using is helping them to balance their answers. That when they answer a strategic question, it's not too broad, it's not too general, but it's not too either specific either. So that's where they need facilitation. That it's not like micromanagement specific, and it's not like too general either. So that's where they kind of need facilitation and help and understanding and finding what would be a right level of specificity. And if you have any example answers, that would be great. Would be like, in the previous project, we wrote like this, or even better, go and get the previous project and see how they were written down and copy with pride. What is a good way of writing a good, customer impact goal? The third bullet is really facilitation, is that when you're asking people and they're kind of telling you and answering those questions, you're putting on your listening antenna and you're like, okay, so what you're saying is this. And then you kind of give back their answer as a summary. And that's a really good conversation. They're like, yeah, you got that thing right. But actually the third one is this is what we mean. And having this kind of ping pong back and forth. And suddenly you actually are getting clear goals and objectives. And the last one is kind of turning the tables or saying that, hey, let's have a quick role play. Imagine that I'm the big boss, like a CFO or somebody, and I'm asking you're trying to convince me about the goals of this project or the value of this work. What would you say? And then the other people kind of like, okay, then I would say this and this. So as you can see, kind of, you don't really need to know the substance in any of these things. You're truly just a facilitator. But the more experience you have, the more examples you have, that definitely is beneficial. Then another one that you probably are familiar with, that actually they are missing the decision maker, that you're kind of having a workshop or a sprint or a project, and well, the big boss isn't there. And everything just grinds to a halt. Well, then the things to do is, well, can you get the decision maker? What if the decision maker is like 20 meters away? Can you go and ask them to join for a little bit? Or maybe just schedule a meeting and then move on with the other parts. Let's freeze this part and move on with the different parts. Or maybe as a good facilitator, you kind of anticipate this and you already get some answers and guidelines from the decision maker if they're not present there. And then last but not least is to encourage people saying, well, the decision maker isn't here, so what is your best guess? Let's not just freeze everything. Let's put down our best guess and put a circle around it that this is a guess, and then work on it. And I think this is my last about the strategic, is the accountability part. That you're facilitating and you're asking people to answer things is that they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to answer you so that we can move forward. And they're not answering you because the answer is actually important, if you know what I mean. So accountability, that you're actually giving right answers. And this is, of course, kind of all the university students understand this quite well, because a lot of here in the university, we're asking you to kind of give answers to a hypothetical situation, and then you're just answering. There isn't not a real project there. But how can you fix that? Well, what if you bring real people in? What if you bring the big boss in, or real customers? What if you just work on real cases? Maybe have a quick exercise and then bring the real deal, their own project, and say, hey, now can you answer about these same questions about your real project? And a couple of little tricks there as well. Once I made people actually literally sign the answers with their name. That little trick to where like, I'm signing this. So actually what I wrote there just like 10 minutes ago, I need to put my name underneath it. Okay, the second, go ahead.
I interrupt a bit because I think this was, I think Hilla had very good point here. Experienced the worst kind of workshop where it's kind of predefined results. And sometimes here, as a facilitator or change agent or consultant, we sometimes can end up in a situation where the big bosses are telling what are the right answer, and they put you as a facilitator to manipulate people to find those right answers. And when ending up this kind of situation, it's really good to somehow understand that before, and then challenge the big bosses that, okay, they are those who should sell their ideas and you are just helping to define, but then this kind of predefined answers or results that are asked to from the process, that's something that can be very, very let's say disturbing and maybe really negative situation for everyone. And as a facilitator, if we are hired hand to do that, then it's really something we shouldn't do.
But all of this is, of course, kind of the preparation work, and that's why we had the second exercise was the temporal thing. That what do you actually do before the facilitation? You understand the hierarchies, power structures, and what are people doing. And Ari had an answer there in the chat as well. And Timo is asking, what's my definition of strategy? Well, to put it bluntly, what I mean by strategic here is kind of like outside the scope of the individual workshop project. We're kind of referring to the first exercise, the onion exercise, that you're thinking bigger than the actual work you're doing, that how it actually fits the big picture. Yeah. So kind of broadly speaking, strategic stuff. I'll move on to the next one. And there's actually some of them have a lot of text. I'm not going to read them. And if something kind of hits your nerve, you can always go back later after this lecture and see that, okay, what did Risto say about it? But this is the customer perspective, and this is kind of another. So if the first one was that how do you actually help people to be more strategic about their answers? Meaning that they see the bigger picture than their individual work. They see the long-term impact of their work. They see how they fits the, different stakeholders and all that. So the other one is this classic of how do you put yourself in the customer's or client's position? And that's really difficult because we're human beings, and seeing the world from another person's perspective is not easy. And empathy is not easy. And we are different kind of people. For some of us, it's really easy. For some of us, it's not. And we need to kind of understand that about ourselves, but also the other people, the ones we're helping. And maybe out of this slide, I'm going to kind of put the first one is really a simple trick. Is that if you really want to introduce kind of how do we bring in feelings and go to the kind of the abstract level of things, but people you're working with are very rational, are very logical, then you kind of just ask them to write down all the rational and logical answers. And then you kind of put them in a parking space, and then it leaves usually it leaves them space to go to, okay, we have those answers there. Now let's try to tune into that. How do you think the customers are feeling about this? What kind of feelings do you think they are involved? The kind of basic stuff of helping people to have a kind of more feeling-based, emotional-based perspective, in addition to the analytical and rational things about customers and all that. Then a classic almost is that when you go to, let's say like a very technical organization that has people with a lot of technical or science background, and you're trying to introduce like, hey, your customers are human beings, and what do humans do? It's often kind of just said that, hey, that's consumer work. And we are not in the consumer business, we're in the B2B business. But actually, if any of you working in B2B business know that they're still customers, and the customers are human beings. And actually, in very many business-to-business situations, you're very more often face-to-face with your customers than in a consumer business. So kind of this division that B2C is all this design empathy stuff and B2B isn't, that's just crap. That's just utter crap. It's not true. But it's a really good excuse to not to use customer perspective. And another way of maybe introducing the customer perspective is to bring in kind of these classical, more business-oriented things. Because a good business has always, for hundreds of years, thought about the customers. But they're just thought about it differently than perhaps designers nowadays. But I mean, concepts that are all about digital business, such as customer lifetime value, that's customer centricity. That requires to have a customer perspective to count business numbers, such as CAC, UAC, my favorite, ARPDAU. All of those are very good and excellent business numbers, and understanding all of those numbers requires a customer perspective. So maybe in a situation you bring these analytical, quantifiable numbers as kind of a bridge towards the customer perspective. And then last one about the customers. For some reason, it's really easy not to talk to customers. It's super easy. And this is 6 powerful excuses that anybody can use. When you go to people and, hey, we should go and talk to our customers. This is my quick list of typical excuses of avoiding customer perspective or avoiding talking to real customers, whether they're business customers or consumers or whatever. And the third one, not my job. That means that maybe I'm the business manager. It's not my job to talk to the customer. That's the job of the designers. That's a really good excuse. And maybe the last one is also getting out of the mental office. I need to go and do something. I need to get out of here. I need to do something that I'm used to. All that. And then last but not least, a few words about ideation, kind of the classic. How do you facilitate? And especially if you've been introduced to kind of more the design thinking is I think in my experience, having the word idea is pretty broad. People have very different, meanings for what you say that let's have an idea. They can be small, they can be big. But value proposition, I think, is a really good thing to start with. So rather than workshopping for ideas or brainstorming for ideas, it's actually sometimes very efficient just to go for the value propositions. And there's a kind of a bullet point, which is the difference between idea and a value proposition. Value proposition is very much about the relationship between you and the end users or the customers, whatever your situation is. And it kind of brings in a lot of actual stuff. So if you're kind of brainstorming, let's start brainstorming for value propositions, it becomes very efficient. Of course, you need to have everybody understand the concept of value proposition quite well. And then another powerful thing is just kind of a facilitation that customer journey is a fantastic tool. And there's so many different versions of it. And it's really what it says in the middle, just says it all, that you can have, it's such a rich tool that you can work on a customer journey for 20 minutes, or you can work on it for 20 days, because it's kind of, it has all in one. You can use it for communication, engagement, research, and actual design work as well. But it also brings together a lot of aspects, different people here, the people with the understanding of the technology or the business or the customer or the industry domain. So that's kind of also a very powerful tool in my opinion. And you can use it, like I have here, is that you can use it as a conversion funnel, that out of all the customers, how do we get the ones that we want? But you can also use it in a design way, which is experience mapping. That how are our customers, what kind of journeys are they having already, independent of our work? And the classic, the business model canvas. It has really good questions. My favorite is who will pay and what. That's always a powerful question. Nothing is free in this planet, so bringing that in always helps to think about, well, how should this work? Maybe it's the first critical thing about that, but the ideas and all that. But typically people use it as a presentation tool, and it can be actually very, very boring. But now I'm already a little bit over time. Sorry about that. So let's have the break. Let's continue after 5 minutes. I'll look at the chat meanwhile that you have the break, and then we continue with the breakout room. So let's continue 1707. Okay, but now everybody's back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you had a good session. And let's see. Now it's gonna the chat's gonna be now full of your comments and key points. I'm just gonna read aloud a couple of here randomly. Implementation of new tools or ways of working usually brings challenges. Yeah, that's very true. Commitment from the team is important. Motivation. That's a good point. Then Uru writes, there will be resistance no matter what. Be prepared for it. I think that's a human condition. And I mean, it doesn't mean negative. I mean, people want to understand things better, and that might look like resistance as well. There's many levels of it. Resistance can't be defeated, so keep calm. That's a good point. And then we have team diversity, understanding who your audience is, making sure that you find the right way of communicating the value for them. Yeah, definitely. Finding the language, understanding the audience, seeing the world from their perspective. So it's like Jari, you talked about last week's exercise. You probably talked even more last week about this. It's really kind of this. We're often trained to be very kind of customer-centric and user-centric, but we can take that exactly same philosophy to our colleagues and to people, and, even in life as well. It's just because at the end of the day, it's that having the skill to see the world from their perspective, understanding what kind of language they use, understanding what kind of terms and concepts they use, and just magic happens when we start doing that.
I think one thing when using different tools is we sometimes introduce them that, okay, we now use this, and then it's precise way of doing, but I think it would be a little bit softening the that okay, we have this tool, but okay, let's try it, or invite people more like experimenting the tool if there is a kind of resistance to use, because sometimes that there people feel that am I competent to use this and so on, and as facilitator we can smooth a little bit this, and then evaluate, reflect on the experience as well, at how well, and also to say that no tool is perfect, and there's also limitations as well. And so that way there could be more this kind of ownership, or let's say fear of being incompetent participant is reduced.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes back to a little bit, at least what comes to my mind, what we touched a little bit already, is that a good facilitator already starts the work before the actual facilitation, meaning trying to kind of understand what's the culture here. You know, are people, do they feel safe to say their opinions? Is there a strong hierarchies, and maybe what kind of prejudice there are? So having like interviews and informal talks with people and listening and try to understand that. Once you maybe start the introduction of a new tool, you know quite well how to bring it. What kind of?
Yes, actually, that we were talking about that last week as well. Being prepared, what does it mean? So understanding the context and being aware of this as well as possible.
I thought here now to give you an example of how, at least I've been, kind of a very concrete example of how to introduce new thinking, because I've been in situations in many times exactly what it says here, kind of introducing design thinking to non-designers, and often either in a single sprint or a workshop, just let them know. And well, I've lost count how many times I've been in a situation of how to do that. So at least I'm going to give this as an example, and I'm sure you can kind of pick from these of different ways of what it might mean for you in different contexts and situations. And in my experience, actually introducing design to non-designers is in some ways much more easier than design to designers. But this is, let's go. This is kind of, funnily bringing up some of the prejudice we have, that maybe you're introducing agile working methods or agile culture things, and then people shut their ears and they're, oh, you said agile, well, I'm not a developer, so let's say I'm not going to listen to you anymore. Maybe it's this, you said the word business, I'm not a business person, so this is not relevant for me. You said the word design, I'm not a designer. No. This is not, I'm not going to listen. I have better things to do. I'm going to go away. Bye-bye. So I'm going to give my little recipe for how to facilitate design thinking if you can't use the D word, or it could be the A word, maybe it's the B word, or whatever is the ear-shutting magical word that your audience doesn't want to hear. And then, of course, it goes into this. What is design thinking if you can't use the D word? Because sometimes you hear people say that, well, design thinking is about designing this for designers in a design culture or something like that. So that's a bit provocative there. But I mean, what is it if you can't say design? What is it? And isn't that like I'm not going to give you a definition here, but I'm sure we all agree that it has a lot of things in it. There's customer centricity. There's probably somewhere a business to be done. There's technology involved. There's a lot of creativity. Typical co-creation, problem-driven, iterative, all of these things. And none of them is the D word. But it's kind of reflecting, again, just like the tools before the break, is that look a little bit deeper, look behind the tool. So looking behind what is agile, looking behind what is design. And then if you really want to introduce, in this case, design thinking, then it's just like what we said and have been talking here, is that what if they just kind of learn it themselves and then get the ownership of it? So the first question for you as a facilitator to ask is that, okay, if you believe that this team, this organization, these people would really benefit from design thinking, then what's the problem worth solving for them? if design thinking is the little medicine that you believe will help them, what is actually the illness behind? And you don't have to come up with the answer, because the step one in my little recipe is to help them to answer it themselves. So step one is, surprise, surprise, objectives, clarifying objectives for them, with them. So a total facilitation exercise, which by now we have been doing in this course a couple of times already. And, just let's start with the real problem. Hey, people, what are, what are the real business problems we have, and what are kind of things, what are we trying to solve? So what is the problem for your team at the moment? And then helping them to clarify the objectives. Which kind of sets the scene, like in this slide, is that it's not just an exercise anymore. You let them bring their problems and kind of their context, their situation into it, which already starts bringing accountability to them, because they have control of the goals and the objectives and the context. So accountability happens, and then also it becomes more real and important. So let's say again, if they have joined a workshop about new ways of working, and you ask them to work on real problems, that brings reality. And understanding the business context of things already helps. And this little quote I hear is, many years back, I actually did a very exercise like this, and after the exercise, in a retrospective, there was this one person who was like, wow, I had this kind of prejudice that design is this kind of soft kids playing with watercolors thing, blah, 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 not taken seriously. But then when the person started with real problems and was, able to bring all of their own issues into it, then they saw that this is actually legitimate. This is actually a real good way of working with problems. So once you kind of set the scene and you let people bring their real problems to the table, help them clarify them, make them dumb, make them smart, then step two, easily introduce real people, introduce real customers. Remember the challenge I talked about of having the customer perspective. Quick fix to that, literally. Go and get a living human being who's a customer and bring them to the same room and make people listen. That is one of the most powerful tricks in the book. And that's a way of really, because they understand that the real customer is there. Everybody understands that this person has an opinion and this person we should listen to. And these are the things I talked about earlier, about the problems that bringing the real person here helps you to facilitate and overcome some of these prejudices and some of these attitudes that might be there, maybe not, but might be there. So bring a real customer, kind of force people to talk with them. If you need to use a gun or need to bribe them with candy, then do it. Step three. Now, step one was clarifying their own business goals. Step two was forcing them to listen to a real customer and their real goals and objectives. And now you have everything kind of set up. Now you let them, taste the creativity or taste some kind of a tool, but don't let them use it. This is my suggestion. Don't let them use it for real. Let them kind of have what I call the silly exercise. Have them work on something that is totally unrelated to them. For many years, I kind of used this startup ideas that give them, hey, now you're in charge of a startup, and then you need to do this and this. And they would kind of play, and it was fun. They had to they didn't have to think about their own work, and they had to, but still think about real things and, use the tools we gave them and so forth. So whatever it is, and introduce some of the fun stuff, role playing and story writing and a lot of laughter. That's really important in the step three. Because you really want them into the mindset. You want to really introduce and really them to experience the mindset. The mindset is that, like here it says, that actually solving a problem is what you really want them to have the mindset. And this is something that was mentioned in the chat as well. You don't want them to just do what is told. You don't want them to do what their boss is expecting them to do. if you introduce the real stuff at this stage, they're probably just going to write what is expected of them. But if you introduce something crazy at this stage, they kind of feel that they don't have to give the right answers. Then also keep in mind and keep an eye on who are the people in the room. Exactly what we talked about earlier. Do you really actually remove the boss person from the room so people can talk freely? And what is the kind of the spirit of the situation? Is there psychological safety to be wrong? Is there psychological safety to say stupid things? Pivoting, in this case, meaning that just changing direction. Can you maybe observe or how they can do that maybe they start with something, but then they kind of, how do they realize that this was a silly thing to do, that this was stupid, and we actually change everything? Because that is typically very difficult in large organizations. And that's where you need the psychological safety, even to play out with the idea that we're going to change things radically. And last but not least, this is, the mindset things, that the energy levels and creativity of people. So the step 3 is very much for you as a facilitator to kind of look at these people working in a creative setup and see that how creative are they? What are their energy levels? And looking at, are there hierarchies here? And can they be creative? And just calibrating the situation. And once they have tried out the creativity in a non-work context, then step 4 is bringing them back. But once they get once they're laughing and they're like, wow, this was really fun to draw these funny, things and cut paper and scissors and role play all of this ice cream truck startup thing that has nothing to do with our own work. We try to keep that feeling, that mindset, and say that, hey, that was actually the warm-up. Now take these real business objectives and real customer problems and now do the same for them. Let's solve the original problem, but still try to keep the mindset, the energy, the inspiration. So here's kind of my list of then talking with them in the end, kind of like making everything that once you introduce these new ways, that once you have maybe succeeded in them of taking a new way of working in their real problems, it becomes, they can see that this is actually beneficial, that now I'm looking at my old problems from a different angle, and they're like, wow, this is actually helping me. The reality show trick is over there, that then after making them explain their results to others, because suddenly you're using the social pressure for them to be accountable of what they did in a good way. But you need to be kind of, like I said, balancing when do you introduce the reality. Maybe have a follow-up after a week or two. Once they're like, hey, remember when we had that design workshop? Now it's been 2 weeks now. What did actually stick? What did you change? Anything like that? That will again be extremely important. But maybe the final step here is that kind of once you do all the 4 steps I had here, then at the end you can say something like that, hey, by the way, everything you did today, everything you did this week, a lot of people call it design thinking. You can call it whatever you want, but a lot of people call it design thinking, and there's these like hundreds of books and thousands of videos and hundreds of tools that you can start now using, because you have now your own design thinking in your own terms, in your own experience, and not kind of given as an outside thing. So that's kind of the summary of it. And I would say that this is kind of a general recipe of introducing new ways of working, new tools, new thinking, new mindset, is that actually start with the business objectives, start with the real stuff. And then typically you need to bring the real users, real customers in there. And only then just, play out and taste the creativity. And then somehow do your best to keep that energy, keep that mindset, and then bring the real stuff. And then they are suddenly kind of almost, without them noticing, they're using the new ways of working in real problems. And then you sit them down and have a good conversation. What happened? What was good? What are you going to do actually next week when you go back to your own work? but like kind of a small this is my recipe, and I'm sure there are others as well. Let's see if there were any comments. Auto text here. Oh, that's a kind of a different discussion there. Simon says, drop the ego, you will see the blind spots. The we know is a very big indicator of that. Yeah, this probably refers back to the earlier one, where one of the reasons not to talk to customers is that because we are so really good at what we do. But that's the magic. Like I said, it's a very, just bring in real people, make them talk with real people. It typically just forces them to take the customer perspective. Okay, any other comments about my 5-step recipe? You might want to try that for Agile, or maybe Scrum, or maybe Lean Startup, or Business Model Canvas, and so on and so on. Hey, thanks for the feedback. Okay, I'm going to now introduce, just, comment in the chat and ask. I will check it definitely. But I'll now introduce exercise 5. And actually, this is kind of a little mini project for you in the end. The exercise is just simply that you're going to get a pair again, deadline next Wednesday noon. And your job is to facilitate for your pair a workshop, which means that in your pair, there's a person A, and person A, which is you, with the hat on that says A. You need to come up with, okay, in my real work, what kind of a workshop I could probably do. Try to make it as realistic as possible. Maybe you are having a workshop in 2 weeks or in a month. So take that and let the other person facilitate you in designing that workshop. If you're not having a workshop, then just, do your best to imagine what kind of a workshop it could be. And it doesn't have to be work. I think a couple of years ago, we had a student who was very active in some kind of a student association, for example. And I remember that she actually then kind of thought about that context and like, oh yeah, we should actually have a workshop on thinking about this and this. Or maybe it's your hobby or something like that. I'm sure you can come up with a realistic enough context of, okay, let's imagine that I'm going to do this workshop. And the person with the hat B on is there to help you, to facilitate you. And I have a lot of slides for you to help here. And the idea is that you're going to facilitate the other person to talk about before, what kind of preparation they need to do, and how do they figure out what's the context, and then actually helping to design the workshop, but also helping them to think about already before the workshop, that what's actually going to happen after the workshop. So here's a bunch of questions for you to think, to facilitate about before the workshop. And of course, these are the same questions for you when you're designing a workshop. This could be a sprint. This could be like a 5-day sprint that you're doing. So these are kind of just the sparring questions for you, either as the person responsible or the person facilitating. I'm not going to go them. You can check them afterwards. And here's another, helping you figure out that this is a template I've used. I've used this for 1-day workshops, but this is actually an old template I used for 5-day sprints. So like a Google Sprint. If you have ever done a Google Sprint, this is definitely a similar template to that. First day, clarifying goals. Second day, customers. Third day, value prop. Fourth day, doing experiments. Fifth day, wrapping up. And then kind of having little questions. Before, remember, this is planning. So you're planning that in the first day, why are we doing this step? What's your, what do you hope to be the outcome of the day, and so forth. Here's another kind of principles, but just a reminder of fundamentals. How many hours you have, how many participants, what are the objectives, this, all of this. What kind of a workshop is going to be? And like it says in the very bottom, as far as you go, what kind of a schedule you're going to get, how many breaks, what's going to be the concrete space. So this is actually my own lists I've used many, many years for me to check when I actually plan a sprint or a workshop or something else, or a big course, is that just checking that I have all the basics covered. And here's what is copied from kind of Jari's checklist from last week about have you thought about the kind of the sensitivities and all of the kind of the other things about the workshop. So check that out as well. And then thinking about after the workshop, how will you know the following? Remember, this was the second exercise, was all about that you should think about the after, even before you have started, because that's where you write down the goals and the objectives. This is where you do the done champagne work. And just a reminder that whatever the workshop sprint is going to be, it's going to be serving a bigger cause, and this is helping to do that. And here again, just a reminder, this is your job for this week. Final exercise. Facilitate your pairs work. They're going to be person A, person B, and then you switch. And again, just like I said in my little recipe, the more realistic you make this exercise, the more beneficial it's going to be for you. So if you really can see that at your work, your hobby, your association, whatever, you should have this workshop, then just take that realistic case. But actually the thing we are interested in, we're not so interested in your workshop planning. We're much more interested in when you sit down with your pair and reflect, what did you learn? Your own thoughts about you as a facilitator, discussing the learnings that you learned with your pair about the facilitation, and what about these tools and all of this. And return the reflection. You don't have to return your workshop plans. Return the reflection to us, because that's what we're really interested in. And that's what this course is all about. Any questions at this stage? And if you're really having a hard time coming with the workshop, then just go with the fun factor. The Eurovision contest was, but maybe it could be just a workshop with your friends on how the results of the Eurovision are going to affect your social life or something like that. It's a workshop, and all of here should apply. And how you're going to facilitate it. Don't let that stop you. Okay. Next week, we're going to be wrapping up the whole course. We're going to talk about, Jari's going to talk about meta skills and roles, and I'm going to talk about pretty much the same stuff as well. And further readings about today, a couple of free tools. We collected when the COVID hit, so that's 2 years ago, we actually collected kind of a free collection of facilitation tools. So that's the link over there. So these are actually tools to the links to the tools and canvases. And then as a bonus is, my favorite is the second to last, skills and trades needed to make a good midwife. So after having this midwife theme for many years in facilitation, I actually once Googled that what makes a good midwife, and I found this blog post, and it's perfect. Check it out. You'll be really surprised that actually a really good midwife is also a really good facilitator. Surprise, surprise. OMG, we're 10 minutes early and I'm done. Jari, anything you want to add? Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, this is a little bit surprising situation.
I've never been in this situation before.
Yeah, I don't know how did this happen. But
I talk too fast.
Yeah, nevertheless. Now it's a good opportunity to ask questions and maybe put in a chat.
Simon, I really like your comment, but in honesty, I'm not sure I understand. You're writing pull versus push. Yeah. But hey, we can also stop early. I mean, if
Yeah.
you want to take a few extra minutes and go and meditate or enjoy the weather, if it's beautiful like it's here, then just go ahead and do that.
If I might use this time for saying something to the students,
absolutely.
please, first of all, the attendance form, and then second, for the last assignment, because this is going to be the last assignment, please do just one submission. Please help us, teaching assistant. You can upload as many files as you want, but please do one submission. It's going to help us so much in checking the assignments. Please, thank you.
Okay.
Excellent, Kiara, thanks. I stopped the recording, so now you can scream and shout whatever you want.